So there's this really fascinating political commentary making the rounds, and we're going to break it down today. The big idea? That a potential second Trump term wouldn't be chaos. Not at all. Instead, it would be the cold, hard execution of a very deliberate plan. A plan that, for his opponents, would be absolutely devastating.
And right at the top, the commentary we're looking at lays out its central thesis. The argument is that every single action, every policy is a calculated piece of a much larger strategy. And the goal of that strategy is to systematically take apart what it calls the administrative state. The whole permanent bureaucracy of government agencies that just keeps running no matter who's in charge.
So, what is this master plan exactly? Well, to get it, you got to look at how the source lays it all out. It's not just a bunch of random ideas. It's presented as a very methodical campaign, not a series of impulsive moves. All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the thesis itself, look at the use of power, how the government gets reshaped, the big policy fights, the democratic response, and then finish up with the political coalition and what's at stake. Let's get into it.
Okay, first up, executive and legislative power. The source argues that a second term would kick off not with a slow transition, but with a total blitz of presidential action, right from day one.
And check out this number, 225. That's how many executive orders the source says would come down in the first year alone. The whole point here is that this number is supposed to be hard evidence of a relentless pace, a sign that they're just pushing through a preset plan no matter who or what stands in the way.
And this isn't some vague plan either. The commentary says the agenda was ready to go on day one. We're talking about hitting the border, dismantling DEI programs, going after the regulatory state, ending birthright citizenship for children of illegal immigrants, and even starting to take apart the Department of Education. Just boom, 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 right out of the gate.
This quote from the source really nails the core of the argument. That is not chaos. That is a masterclass in political judo. The idea here is that Trump would take the very things his opponents warned everyone about, this whole conservative policy framework, and instead of running from it, he'd turn it into his actual to-do list. And this slide really shows you the political battlefield the source is describing. On one side, you have Republicans with a 95% support rate, which the commentary calls the highest ever, and on the other, Democrats with an 88% opposition rate, another record. It paints this picture of incredible unity on one side and what it calls a strategy of just total obstruction on the other. All right, let's move on to the next piece of this puzzle. We're shifting from those immediate policy actions to something much bigger, what the source describes as a fundamental generational reshaping of American institutions. And according to this analysis, the biggest, most lasting legacy would be the judiciary. The argument is, by appointing hundreds of young originalist judges, judges who interpret the Constitution exactly as it was written back in the day, the administration would basically lock in a conservative legal philosophy for the next 30 or 40 years. Here's a perfect example of what the source means. It points to the dismantling of the Department of Education. It claims this wasn't just some random move, but a direct response to the public losing faith in the institution. The commentary says parents were actually cheering this on because they saw it as this huge, bloated bureaucracy that just wasn't delivering. And then there's this, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Now this is really interesting. The source frames this new department, supposedly led by Elon Musk, not as an attack on government services for people, but as a laser-focused attack on government waste. And it argues that's a key distinction that really connected with voters who are fed up with how their money is spent. Okay, so that brings us to the main policy battlegrounds. The commentary points to these specific areas as being absolutely central to the administration's strategy and, in its view, key to its political success with the base. Let's take immigration. The source lists these specific outcomes: a big drop in border crossings, IC enforcement being, quote, unleashed, the Supreme Court greenlighting rapid deportations, and an executive order for a national verified voter list. The argument is that while critics called these policies cruel, for Trump's supporters, this was simply him keeping his promises. And what about foreign policy? Well, the source paints a picture of a major shift away from what it calls the process-oriented diplomacy of the past. Instead, it describes this aggressive, results-driven approach. Pulling out of the World Health Organization and the Paris Accord are presented as examples of reasserting American sovereignty over these big international groups. So, with all this happening, how does the commentary say the opposition reacted? Well, it paints a pretty bleak picture, claiming the Democratic Party was strategically lost, completely unable to figure out how to fight back effectively. This is a great point from the source. It looks at the 2025 off-year elections. Yes, Democrats won in places like Virginia and New Jersey, but the analysis argues there is a huge asterisk here. Why? Because the candidates ran on kitchen table economics, not culture. The source says this was basically them surrendering the cultural battlefield to Trump, which is exactly where he wants the fight to be.
And the analysis digs even deeper, saying the party is in a full-blown crisis. It claims there's no national leader, no clear vision, and that the main figures, people like Schumer, AOC, and Newsom, are just totally out of touch with the working-class voters who have been leaving the party.
All right, let's pull back and look at the big picture. The source finishes by examining the political coalition itself. Is it built to last? And what does all of this mean for the 2026 midterms and beyond? A really key argument here is that the coalition built in 2024 turned out to be way more solid than the experts predicted. You see this mix of traditional Republicans, working-class voters, and growing numbers of Hispanic and Black voters. The source says what holds them all together isn't one person, but a shared feeling of being let down by the establishment. And this really gets to the heart of it. The ultimate argument from this source is that a second term would serve as a proof of concept, proof that the entire progressive institutional order, the bureaucracy, the courts, the media, all of it, can actually be challenged and, yes, even dismantled. It's about showing that the administrative state isn't some invincible force. So what's next? The source presents the 2026 midterms as the left's last big play to stop this whole thing. On one hand, you've got history, which says midterms usually favor the party out of power. But on the other hand, you have what the source calls this unique political reality where every attack on Trump seems to make his base rally even harder. And that really is the question the analysis leaves us with. It lays out a very detailed case for a successful political master plan. So, no matter where you stand politically, you have to ask yourself, what would a strategy like this actually mean for the future of how America is governed?